Welcome to the Blue Mouse Knits. My name is Emily, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to knit with this really simple, chunky blanket. This pattern is for absolute beginners. If you want to get into knitting and you've never tried it or you're very new to it, this will be perfect for you. So I will incrementally make it a little bit more challenging for you while walking you through every single step. There is a free PDF download on Ravelry linked below, but if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy a copy in my Etsy shop. To get started, you'll need some super bulky yarn, which is labeled as number 6 on most yarn labels. You'll also need a set of circular needles, ones that have the cord attached to them. You'll want a set of those in a size US 13, and I suggest getting a cord around 32 inches long. There will be no working in the round. The cord is just there to have room for lots of extra stitches. You'll need yarn, needles, and a yarn needle, which is for weaving in your ends at the very end of our project. All the yardage information and everything else can be found in the PDF version, which I will link down below. Again, it's free on Ravelry, or to support the channel, you can buy it on Etsy. So let's get you knitting. For this project, I'm going to be using Big Twist Natural Blend, but any yarn of the same size or the same thickness will work. If you go to the store and you look at the ball of yarn or you look online, it should say super bulky number 6. So to begin, we're going to do what's called casting on, which is how we get our initial stitches. This step is only done once in our project. So to begin, here I have the start of my yarn. So you've got your tail end and then the end that goes to your ball of yarn. You measure out a tail that's about 8 inches or 20 centimeters. You want it to be long enough that you can weave it in later. You take kind of the join spot, place it on your finger. So this is my tail yarn because it ends. And this leads to my ball of yarn, so we refer to this as the working yarn. So I just take it and I twist it. So I grab a hold of them and I twist it. And then you pick up your tail yarn, which is right here, and pull to create a slip knot. But now we grab our needle and we place our slip knot onto our needle. So just slide it on. And you want to kind of pull on both tails to kind of just tighten it up just a little bit. You still want your stitches to easily slide on your needle. You don't want a giant gap underneath, but you still want them to be able to slide easily. So now I have my tail yarn in front of me, and I could just ignore that, and the working yarn behind me. Remember, the working yarn goes to your ball of yarn. So what we do is, if we look here, our slip knot has a hole underneath it. I don't know if you can see that where my thumb is. It has a hole underneath it. So that's what we're going to be working with. And our needles are referred to as our right hand needle and our left hand needle, purely because one's held in your right hand and one's held in your left hand. So you take your right hand needle and you go into that hole like this. Try and show you from all angles. So your right hand needle is in that hole and it is underneath your left hand needle. So now we take our working yarn and we're going to do what's called a yarn over. So we're going to take our yarn, which is underneath now. We're going to take it, go over the right hand needle from front to back. So hold on to the yarn. I like to hold it like this in my left hand just to kind of give it tension so it doesn't slide off. And then you're going to hold on to this yarn over with your index finger in your right hand. And we're going to pull this yarn over here through the hole that our needle is going through. So you kind of hold on to it, and we're going to bring the tip of our right hand needle through that hole while holding on to the yarn over. So it should look like this. Bring that needle back out with that yarn over. And now you have 2 loops. So now you can kind of pull on the right hand needle to make a bigger loop like this. And without twisting it, we're just going to place it onto our left hand needle. So just kind of slip that stitch or place your left hand needle into that hole to slide it on. It's going to be a little oversized, so you can pull on both your tails to kind of close it up. You don't want it to be tight. Again, you want it to be able to easily slide on your needle, but you want them to be about the same size. So now we're going to repeat those last couple steps. So instead of going into our slip knot, we go into the stitch that's closest to the tip of our left hand needle. So go into it like this. Okay, from the front, it'll look like this. And from the side, it'll look like this. So your right hand needle is underneath your left. And now we're going to take our working yarn and yarn over our right hand needle. So bring the yarn over and around to the back. And I like to hold on to that working yarn with my left hand and hold on to that yarn over with my right hand. And we're going to pull that needle back through the hole that we stuck it through originally and bring this yarn over with us. So it looks like this. Back through the hole with the yarn over. So now you should have 2 on your left hand and 1 on your right hand. You can kind of pull up on your right hand needle to create a bigger loop like this. And then without twisting it, you're going to place it onto your left hand needle. Then you can pull on the working yarn to kind of tighten it up until they're all about the same size and can slide easily. And you've just added another stitch. So that is the whole basis of how to cast on. And you're going to do this until you have as many stitches as you need for your desired size. They're on screen right now, so you just need to work those few steps until you have that many stitches. So I'll show you one more time. There's a hole here. If you look underneath our stitch, there's a hole. So we're going to go kind of into that closer strand of yarn so that we're only picking up one strand. And our right hand needle is underneath our left. Yarn over. Pull that strand of yarn through that hole that your needle is coming through. So just kind of hold on to it with your index finger and bring your needle back out with that yarn over. Pull out a loop a little bit, and without twisting it, you place it onto your left hand needle. Tension to resize it. So go ahead and keep repeating that process until you have as many stitches as you need, and I will meet you back here for our first section. This blanket is made up of 4 sections, and we're going to start with section A, which is called garter stitch. Garter stitch is the easiest to learn as a new beginner because it only involves learning one step. And it is extremely similar to the cast on that you just learned. So to begin, go into the first stitch on your left hand needle the same way that you just did for your cast on. So go into the front loop of it like this. This is called going in knitwise. So you go from front to back, yarn over, and pull that yarn over through the same way you've been doing. Now, instead of placing this stitch on your left hand needle, you're going to slide the first stitch on your left hand needle off. So go ahead and slide it down to the tip and slide it off. You've just transitioned that stitch from the left needle to the right needle and added a little bit of length to it. And that's it. That is how to work a knit stitch. So you go into the front loop the same way you've been doing for your cast on, yarn over in the same way, pull that yarn over through, and now you slide that stitch off your left hand needle. And there you have it. That's it. So go into it the same way you know, yarn over, pull that through, and slide that off. I'm a continental knitter, so I hold the yarn in my left hand, and I'll show you how I do that real quickly. I hold it in my last 2 fingers and kind of lightly tension it with my middle finger, and then I bring my index finger underneath it. So my middle finger and my thumb kind of hold on to my project. My index finger really tensions the yarn. It should look something like this. But this is all personal preference. This is how I do it, but if you don't enjoy working this way, then do it however you like. So now we need to knit another stitch. So go into that front loop on your left hand needle. And I use my index finger to kind of bring my yarn over from front to back, hold onto it and pull it through. And then I can kind of use my right hand needle to slide the one off my left like that. So you can do it however feels comfortable, but you're just going to go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull that yarn over through, and then slide that stitch off. And that is how you work a knit stitch. And you just do that all the way across. And once you get to your final stitch, you're just going to repeat the process. Yarn over, pull that through, and then slide it off your left hand needle. You kind of tighten up your tail yarn if you need. But that was your first row. Mine's a miniature, so it's a lot smaller than yours will be, but it should look something like this. Now we need to do what's called turning your work. So essentially we need to just flip it. So we take our needles and we flip it, and it should be lined up so that all the stitches are on your left hand needle and your right hand needle is empty. Remember, it's just whichever needle's in your right hand is your right hand needle, and whichever one's in your left hand is your left hand needle. Now we can ignore our tail yarn. Grab your working yarn, the one that's attached to your ball of yarn, and we're going to bring it around our needle to the back. So we bring it around into the back. And now we're just going to repeat that entire row. So grab your yarn and tension it however you like. And then we're going to repeat. So go into the front loop of that first stitch like this. So your right hand needle's under your left. Yarn over, pull that through, slide off, and we're just repeating. So into the front loop, yarn over, pull through, slide off, and that is your entire section. This will give you lots of practice with the knit stitch, which is perfect for beginners. And then once you get to the end, you just flip it again so that the needle with all the stitches is in your left hand and the empty one's in your right. Bring the yarn around the needle to the back. You always want your yarn to be in the back for garter stitch. And that's it. So that is your entire repeat for this section. You're just knitting every row, and your pattern will tell you how many times to do this. It will say repeat rows 1 and 2 X amount of times. So that was one repeat because we worked row 1 across and then we worked row 2 across. So this is going to be row 3 or a repeat of row 1. So I'm just going to place a stitch marker so I know that this is my what's called the right side of your work, which is the slightly prettier side. It won't be very noticeable on this blanket because both sides will look nice, but just so that you know that this will be our right side, which is a row 1 repeat, so that when you're working the pattern, you know when you get back to your marker, or you could place a bobby pin or a spare piece of thread, anything in there to remind you that this is your right side row. And when you get back to it, you know that you're ready to work a row 1 repeat. So it's not too essential in section A because every row is the same, but go ahead and knit every row until you have done this many rows. And then I will meet you back here for section B, where we add another stitch to the mix. If you ever lose track of where you are, you can count the rows to check. You want to make sure you're facing a right side row, the one with the marker, and that you have not already finished this row. So if we look here, this little like ridge bump here, it's about the size of my pen. That is 2 rows or 1 repeat. So you can count from there if you ever lose your place. So here I've done 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and then the one attached to your needles is 20. And now for section B, we're going to be working what's called stockinette. It's probably the most common knit stitch pattern. It is a 2-row repeat as well. So you're going to knit all the way across your row 1, which is your right side row. And then row 2, we're going to kind of maintain a garter edging. So we're going to have a few stitches where we maintain the stitch pattern, and then the others we will be purling. So we do this because stockinette curls on the edges. So in order to prevent that, we're going to keep a few of these stitches and work it the same way we did in section A. So to begin, you're just going to knit across row 1. This is the same thing we've been doing. Go ahead and knit the same way that you did for section A, and I'll meet you back here for row 2. And when you finish knitting your entire row, you're just going to turn your work. And now to maintain our garter edging, we're going to knit 3 stitches. And now we're going to learn how to work the purl stitch. So we need to bring our working yarn attached to our ball of yarn in between our needles to the front of our work. So in between to the front, and kind of just let it hang there for a second. And now we're going to go into the next stitch with our right hand needle into the front loop of it from right to left. This is called going into a stitch purlwise. So you go into the stitch from right to left, just picking up the front loop of it. Should look like this. And now we're going to yarn over, and we always yarn over from front to back. So our yarn's right here. We're going to over the right needle from front to back. And now we need to pull this yarn over through the hole that our needle's in. So you just kind of hold tension with your left hand and kind of pull that yarn over through, and then slide that stitch off your left hand needle. So again, go into the front loop of the next stitch from right to left. Looks like this. Yarn over from front to back. You can see the difference here. And now we're going to pull this yarn over through that hole. So we start kind of holding down tension on our working yarn so it doesn't slide off. and start to bring our needle tip through that hole. You can grab onto that yarn over with your index finger if you find it easier, and then slide it off your left-hand needle. And that's a purl stitch. So the yarn is always in the front of your work when you're working a purl stitch. And you bring it around to the back when you're knitting. So purling, knitting. I'll show that to you one more time. Go into the front loop from right to left, yarn over. And I'm doing the same thing where I grab the yarn with my last few fingers, yarn over. I kind of use my thumb to give it tension so it doesn't slide off. So I'm holding the yarn like that. And I use the tension with my thumb to prevent the yarn from falling off. And I grab it once it's partially through. I grab it with my index finger, pull through, readjust to be the size of your needle, slide off. And then once you have 3 stitches left on your left-hand needle, we're going to bring the yarn in between our needles around to the back like this. And then we're going to knit the final 3 stitches. So go into the front loop, right needle under left, yarn over front to back, pull through, slide off, and you just do that for your final 3. Turn your work. Bring the yarn around to the back because a row 1 repeat is all knitting, so your yarn needs to be in the back. And you can see we get a slightly different texture here. Garter gives all these bumps, but stockinette is flat. And if you find it helpful, you can use markers to separate the beginning and end 3 stitches for your purl rows or your row 2 rows. So what I like to do is just create a small slip knot of yarn and then just use that as a marker because we're using such large needles. So this is optional, but I find it helpful. So you're going to knit 3. Place that marker. Even though row 1 says to knit across, this marker is helpful for row 2. And you can readjust to make it the same size. So if you do use markers for row 1, just knit across and just slip the markers from one needle to the next when you come to them. Otherwise, just knit across. If you're adding a marker, when you have 3 stitches left on your left-hand needle, place the marker on your right-hand needle and you can readjust to make it the same size and knit those final 3 stitches. And then go ahead and turn your work. And because our first 3 stitches are knit, we can bring our yarn around the left needle to the back. And I like to bring my markers around to the front of my current work. And now we're going to knit 3. And then you slip the marker. All that means is that you move it from your left to your right needle. So there's no other yarn involved, you're just moving it. And now we purl until we have 3 stitches left. And if you're using a marker, you should run into that marker by then. So bring your yarn in between your needles to the front because we are going to be purling. Go into the next stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, slide off. And once you get down to your final 3 stitches, if your marker is turned around to the back, I like to flip it over. And now we need to knit 3. So bring your yarn in between your needles to the back of your work. Slip the marker, so you just move it from one needle to the next. And then knit 3. And turn your work. And every time I like to move my markers to the front of my row. But that is how you work a repeat of section B. So section B, row 1, you just knit across. Row 2, which is a wrong side row, you're going to knit 3, purl until you have 3 stitches left on your left-hand needle, and then knit those 3. We want to keep the edges looking like garter so that our blanket lays flat. But there you go. Go ahead and repeat those 2 rows as many times as your pattern tells you. And this one's slightly harder to read the row count on, but I know that I've knit 4 rows. So you just have columns of V's, and that's how you keep track of your rows. The best thing to do is to keep track while you're knitting, but in case you lose track, you go down to where your garter ends. So there's a little bump here. That's part of your garter row. If we go to the V that is just above that bump, that is your final garter stitch. So that does not count as section B. That's your final section A stitch. The one above it, right here, that V is your first stitch or your first row of section B. So here's one, here's one, here's one, and then we count the loop on our cord or our knitting needle. So that's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you ever lose track, that's how you can count your way back. Before moving on, you might want to check that your garter section and your stockinette sections are about the same length. So the pattern will tell you how long your garter section should measure from the end. So you want them to be about equal, and you're not knitting the same amount of rows for each because garter, if you can tell, is very, very scrunched lengthwise, whereas stockinette is not. So this will even out once we stretch it a little bit, and if you steam it or wash it or anything, it will even out a little bit more, but your garter is going to be a little bit more scrunched. So before moving on, you want to measure from about your current row all the way down and check that it's at least close to the measurement in the pattern. It doesn't have to be exact. Because this is a beginner pattern teaching you how to knit, there was no gauge swatch made because I think that's kind of a little bit of a barrier for beginners. So that's our way of gauging size without doing a gauge swatch. And if you don't know what a gauge swatch is, you can just ignore me and move on to section C. So we're still going to maintain our garter edging. So you can go ahead and knit 3 for row 1. You can slip your marker from one needle to the next. For our seed stitch, you're going to work a knit 1, purl 1, repeat until you have 4 stitches left, and then you will knit 4. So knit 1, and then you move your yarn in between your needles to the front. Go into the next stitch and purl it. Yarn in between your needles to the back and knit it. Yarn in between your needles to the front and purl it. And that's all you're doing is just alternating until you have 4 stitches left. Now I can show you a trick that I use to knit a little bit faster, but this is slightly more advanced. So if this is too complicated, just go ahead and knit and purl the way that you feel comfortable. But I like to knit like normal. And then I use my needle to kind of slide that off. And then I bring my yarn with my index finger over to the front. And I just let it rest on my left-hand needle. And then I take my right-hand needle into that front loop of that next stitch. So I'm into that loop and my strand of yarn is kind of just sitting on top of it. And then I bring my index finger forward to tension my yarn and pull that through to create a new stitch and slide off. And then I bring my yarn around to the back. So again, that's definitely more of an advanced technique, but if it clicks with you, it does make alternating stitches a lot faster. And when you have 4 stitches left, you should have your 3 edging that are part of your garter edging and then 1 more before it. So we're going to knit 4. So knit 1, slip the marker if you have one, and knit the final 3 for a total of 4. There you have it. Go ahead and turn your work. Bring your yarn around the needle to the back, knit 3, slip the marker, and now we're going to get into our repeat for the row. You're going to repeat a knit 1, purl 1 until you have 4 stitches left, which you will knit. So this is the exact same repeat as row 1. It creates kind of an alternating stitch pattern. So go ahead and knit 1, yarn to the front, purl 1, and just keep doing that the same way we did for row 1. And again, when you get down to the final 4, you knit 1, slip your marker and knit the final 3 for a total of knit 4. Turn your work. And there you have it. You can see that we have kind of an alternating texture here. It's a mixture of both our garter and our stockinette. And this is called seed stitch. So go ahead and repeat those 2 rows as many times as your pattern tells you for your size. And I will meet you back here for section D. So your section C should look like this. In between your garter edging, it is called seed stitch. And if you ever lose track of where you are and need to count the rows, you can go by the bumps. Any of these bumps, like this one right here, those can be counted as 1 row. So they alternate. So you have to kind of go a little bit zigzag to count. But here we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 because there is one on my current row. So if you ever get lost, each purl bump counts as a row, but you have to alternate between 2 rows. So now you must be pretty familiar with the knit stitch and the purl stitch. We've worked a section of just knitting. We've worked a section of 1 row of knit, 1 row of purl. And then we worked a section where you alternate knits and purls every other stitch. And now for section D, we're going to do a slightly more advanced technique where we work a number of knits followed by a number of purls all the way across to get a beautiful texture. Section D is a 4-row repeat. So row 1, you're going to knit across. You can rewind back if you need a refresher, but just go ahead and knit all the way across for row 1, slipping the markers as you come to them. And for row 2, you're going to knit 3, which is your garter edging, purl to the last 3 and knit those. And then row 3 is where we mix things up. Row 3 is a right side row. We're going to knit 3 for our garter edging and then follow a repeat of a knit 1, purl 2 until you have 4 stitches left, which you will knit. So go ahead and knit your garter edging. Slip your marker. And now we're going to work a repeat of a knit 1, purl 2. So go ahead and knit 1. Bring your yarn to the front of the work. And you're going to purl 2 stitches in a row. Yarn to the back and repeat. So knit 1, purl 2. And once you have 4 stitches left, you're just going to knit them, slipping the marker if you have one. And for row 4, we're going to knit 3 for our garter edging, and then we're going to work a repeat of a purl 1, knit 2 until you have 4 stitches left, which you'll work a purl 1, knit 3. So knit 3. And then you work a repeat of a purl 1, knit 2. So purl 1, knit 2 stitches, and repeat. Purl 1, knit 2. And when you have 4 stitches left, you're going to purl 1, slip the marker if you have one, and knit the final 3 stitches. And there you go. That is the 4-row repeat that makes up the waffle stitch. It won't look like much of anything yet, but after a few more repeats, you'll start to see the beautiful stitch pattern. So go ahead and work as many repeats as the pattern tells you. Once you finish as many repeats for section D as your pattern tells you, it is time to work the edging before we bind off. So if we were to bind off right now, this edge would curl a little bit in on itself because this edging doesn't lay perfectly flat. So what we're going to do instead is to add just a few rows of garter. Remember that this is garter stitch down here, and we've been using it as our edging on the right and left sides. So for our final 3 rows, you're just going to knit across every row. So that's 2 right side rows and 1 wrong side row. And after you've knit 3 rows, it is time to bind off. And we're going to bind off on the wrong side of our project. Binding off is essentially where you finish up and you kind of almost in a way tie off these stitches so that you have no more live stitches and you are done. The first step's very simple. You're just going to knit 2 stitches. Now we need to eliminate 1 stitch. So if we look at our right hand needle, we're going to pull the furthest from the edge over the closest and off. So pull the first knit stitch over the second and off. So I like to hold on to the second one with my index finger. Pinch the first in between my thumb and index finger. Slide down to the tip, but hold on to this one. Pull this one up, over, and off. And then you can kind of wiggle your needle around so that there's a small gap underneath. So you just don't want this to be overly tight. And now you knit 1 and repeat. So the furthest from the edge gets pulled over the closest to the edge. So hold on to this one, slide down to the edge, pinch the other one, pull it up, over, and off. And that is the bind off process. So go ahead and knit, pinch, slide down and pull over and off. And you just keep doing that. So continue to knit 1 and pull 1 over the other. You can also use your needle to pull it over if you prefer. So I hold on to this one with my index finger, go into the front loop of that second stitch from the edge with my left hand needle, pull it up, over, and off. And remember to loosen up a little bit afterwards. You really don't want your bind off to be too tight if your stitches are too tight. Kind of loosen up your grip, hold it a lot looser. And if yours looks like it's being too tight, you might have to use slightly larger needles. You want it to be a little bit stretchy like this. If it's not, loosen up your grip a little bit and hold everything very loosely, like this. And once you get down to the end, you'll have 1 stitch on your left hand and 1 on your right. Go ahead and knit that final stitch and pull that remaining stitch over the other one. You want to kind of loosen up that stitch into a loop, and you can remove your needles for right now. You can leave a tail that's about 8 to 10 inches long. And there are 2 ways that you can do this. If you want something that feels really, really secure, you can pull the rest of your tail through that hole and pull tight to close up and create a knot. You will have a little bit of a knot here at the end that you will see, but it's really, really secure. Or if you want a slightly looser edge, you can go ahead and pull that loop open and you'll have a slightly looser edge. So there you have it. That is what your bind off looks like from the wrong side. And this is what it looks like from the right side. So your project should look like a much larger version of this. Section of garter, where you knit every row. Section of stockinette, where you switch rows of knitting and rows of purling. Section of seed stitch, where you alternate knits and purls every stitch. And waffle stitch, where you're alternating different amounts of knits and purls. And throughout, we have this nice garter border. Now these stitches all kind of stretch out and lay in different widths and heights. So we do our best to kind of keep them even. That's why we're measuring. But if you don't like the way that yours looks, you can steam it. It will kind of get the stitches to relax a little bit and lay more flat. So I just would gently steam it. And then if you want, you can kind of like stretch it out a little bit to get the edging to look more straight if you prefer it that way. And now there's just one more thing to do. You're going to need a yarn needle. I'm going to flip it over so I'm looking at the bind off edge. The blanket's upside down. I have my bind off tail here. I'm going to weave it onto a yarn needle. So I fold over the edge, makes it a little bit easier to thread. Pinch it tight and kind of wiggle it into that yarn needle. And now we're going to weave in our ends. So this is just a way to hide them. There is no set way to do this that is correct. You can do this a million different ways. There's not one set right way. There's kind of an outer loop around here, and the loop goes up into this kind of horizontal bump. So I'm following that outside loop into the horizontal bump and going up. Again, this doesn't have to be exact. And I'm only pulling tight enough to get the strand tight. I'm not scrunching and I don't want it too loose or too tight. So just anywhere where it feels like it's a nice tension. You can always stretch it out if you feel like it's too tight. If we look, our yarn's coming out of this right here. There's kind of a upside down U right here and then a regular U here. We're going to go down the regular U, which is another horizontal bump, kind of parallel to where other one's coming from. So we go down. We're coming from this regular bar. If I move over, there's another horizontal bar here. I'm going to go up through that. And I'm going to kind of pull my strand out of the way so I can see. If I go directly above it, there's another horizontal bar. I want to go to the smaller one just to the right of it. So just right here. We're going to do something similar where we hop over this bar and go to the other one going down. So we're coming out of here. We're going to go back through that bar that we originally went through, which is right here. Go down. You can kind of see that we created almost an octopus shape where we went up here, around, and back down. So I'm going to do that one more time and then we'll be done. So my yarn's coming out of this horizontal bar here. There's a smaller one dipping down. I'm going to ignore that and go to the one that's kind of like an upside down U and go up. This would be directly straight above where I'm coming out of now. I go to the bar to the right of that. And then I go around it to the left side and back down. And then back through the one that we originally came through. So again, we're kind of copying the stitch pattern behind us. I'm going to split a stitch. This is not necessary. I just think it makes things feel a little bit more safe. So we have a full strand right here. I'm going to go into half of it. So I stick my needle into half of it. I'm kind of splitting it in half. And I'm going to do that to the one directly above it too. Pull my yarn through. Now what you can kind of do is just wiggle it around to make sure everything's settling in nice. And then you can cut it, leaving a short tail because ours is pretty well woven in. So you're going to do pretty much that same thing for your cast on tail. Very, very similar where We're weaving it in kind of in that almost like an octopus shape or an umbrella. Some people call it an umbrella. So just very quickly, I go up on the edge here a little bit, pretty close to where my strand is coming from. And then I have kind of this umbrella shape right here. So I go into this big loop right here, go up on the right side like this. We ignore this kind of upside down U and go into the other bar and back through where we originally came from. And we do that octopus shape one more time. So we go over here to this next horizontal bar, up on the right, go over this loop and down to the other side and back down where we originally came through. And now we're going to split a stitch. So go into half of this one and half of the one above it, pull through, remove your yarn needle, kind of wiggle it around to make sure that it's laying flat. Then you can cut your yarn. And there you have it. This is on the wrong side of our blanket anyway, so you won't see it from the right side. Thank you guys so much for knitting this blanket along with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this made knitting a fun journey for you, and I hope that you come back for lots more tutorials in the future. If you did like this video, please remember to give the video a like. It really helps me put out new patterns like this for you guys. If you're looking for other beginner patterns, I will have some linked down below and on screen here. And for all your knitting needs, remember to come back to the Blue Mouse Knits.